Marvelous. Well, he was born, as I said, in 1959, and the family immediately went to Trinidad. The father was an engineer, and he was constantly on the move. And so the child himself was literally I think 6 or 7 years old when the family moved again. So his entire early life was spent in Trinidad as a little boy. They went back to Montreal in '66, and he was an indifferent student at school. They put him to a British school, he and his brother, but it didn't work. He came back home to Trinidad, and he didn't come to England really until he was 19 years old. He walked out of school when he was 17. He didn't show much interest. He wasn't an early person interested in art, or didn't seem to be. But suddenly, at the age of 17, I think he wanted to be, he was sort of faintly like kids are. He was interested in music, particularly pop music. And I think he wanted to be, he had the idea that he'd like to sort of design covers for pop music or something. Anyway, he came to London, and as I say, at the age of 19, and he amazingly got a place in Wimbledon for a year, a sort of a fundamental class. And this is where he met his first wife, Bonnie Kennedy. And he was 21, she was 18. She was doing a fashion course, and she went on to do a fashion course. He left after a year, he left and went to St. Martin's, and he was at St. Martin's for about a year and a half. Whilst he was in London, to make some money, through her, he met a group of people who were sort of the dressers of the English opera company, the Colosseum Opera. And so he spent really quite a lot of time working in the costume department to make money. And he had a really, really squalid place to live in King's Cross, a sort of basement. It was something he got for nothing virtually, and he kept it for about 17 years. Eventually, he married this Bonnie lady, and they go back to Canada, and where he actually continues working as a sort of a dresser, but this time for a film company. And eventually, but quite a long time afterwards, he goes back to Canada, as I said. He was at Wimbledon in 79 to 83. He goes back to Canada in St. Martin's, goes back to Canada, and suddenly he decides, or he's got enough money for some extraordinary reason, he decides that he wants to come back to go to an art school again. So he comes back to London, and he goes to the Chelsea School of Art, but he's 30 years old. He comes back, he goes to Chelsea in 89 to 90. Is that 30? I think it is, yes, he's about 30. And he, surprisingly, we'll be looking at his work now to show you what happened, because he surprisingly got this is for my money, this is one of my favorites. This is from Camilla's photo. So this is the real color. And it's a self-portrait. It's called Fernandez Compound, and it was done in 2015 to 23. And I've put the photograph on it, which is a slightly, I mean, this is a rather flattering one. He's older than this now, and he doesn't look nearly so good looking, I think, as the photograph that I found. But look at the image, and it's very, very interesting. Look at the colors of them. His use of color is quite remarkable. But what is particularly fascinating, and you'll see it again and again, is the way that he uses this sort of framing situation. So you're looking beyond him. He's playing with perspectival space all the time, all the way through. You're never quite sure whether there's a foreground, middle ground, and background all seen together. And his point is that when we look at things, we don't look at things in a perspectival way. We actually see lots and lots of things. We don't see one specific thing. Everything is jumbled up in our eye. And this is what he's really trying to create. Let's go to the next one, because this shows his early work. Now, the top one, which is very strange, it's called Contemplating Culture. And it was done in 1985. It was done when he was at Wimbledon. And basically, it's a sort of self-portrait with a dyed hair, looking at a Roman sculpture. But in the middle distance, you see sort of objects of Bonnard and Matisse, particularly Matisse. There's still life. And right in the background, you see the England, London. Now, this is the sort of thing he was doing in 1985. Underneath, there's a much later one. And this is called On the Edge of Town. It was actually not that much later, it's 86. But the interesting thing about the one below is that he says in one of the conversations I've been listening to, that he was fascinated. It was a friend of his who literally, although he doesn't say so, was coming to the point that he was possibly homosexual and he was going to completely change his life. And this particular picture is of him. It's called At the Edge of Town. And this is his picture of it. This is now the National Gallery of Scotland, and it was actually given to them by his first wife. Now, the picture on the right is much more the sort of thing we're going to be seeing later on. Now, this is post Chelsea, and it's called The Hitchhiker. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that the canvas is divided into three, and this is going to be very typical of his work. Now, look at the way the top and the middle and the bottom are all painted slightly differently. And the idea of the picture entirely is that he's trying to tell us about a truck that is heading west, actually into the unknown, because Canada is enormous. This again is one of the Canadian images, and of course all for hope for the future is on this hitchhiker. Presumably, is it going to be successful or not? And look at the different way that the paint goes on. Look at the drip painting on the front and the rather sort of realistic ceiling, sky, and the pines, which are very typical of Canada in the center. And this was painted actually after his time in Chelsea. Okay, let's have the next one, because this is an interesting one, because it shows you his studio at Chelsea School of Art. That's what we're looking at here. But at the top, you'll see a Barnett Newman. He gets interested in Barnett Newman because he's interested in the way that Barnett Newman divides the canvas into these three images. And this is something that's going to stay with him forever, right the way through. And this was, of course, one of the zip paintings that he did in 1949. I mean, Barnett Newman. And astonishingly, this picture on the right, which is called Grasshopper, and it's 1990, and astonishingly, he won. He was exhibited with the London group, and he won the Whitechapel Prize in 1991. And this actually was quite extraordinary because people didn't know his work at all. Now, I want you to look at this moderately carefully, because you can see how he picks up on the three things of Newman. You see here, here, and here. But look at the center thing. Now, the point about the three, what he says about this is he's quoting a Canadian writer, and it's called Grasshopper. And this is what he says about it. Man is a grasshopper here. This is what the Canadian writer says. A mere insect making its way between the enormous discs of heaven and earth. And he says, and I'm quoting him, I thought I could literally expand upon the Newman effect and have two abstracts or organic sections, and the middle that was realistic. And this is why he called it Grasshopper. So you've got a Canadian outback building in the center and the two images of abstraction on the side. And this is what he got the prize for. Okay, next one. Now this one is much, much, much more the sort of thing we're going to see much later. And not surprisingly, it's called the Milky Way. And this was a great success, tremendous success. And this is 89 to 90. Now look at it separately. Now again, what he actually says is the dual effects of the Milky Way, the blackness of the star-studded sky reflected in the lake, and the lone figure paddling beneath the grey trees. Now, the important thing about this is that he picks, obviously, he's been looking at Van Gogh, because Starry Night, of course, at the top, which is 89. And the one on the lower part is one of the many pieces that he works on. Now, to make these final pictures, he has perhaps worked on 2, 3, 4, 5 images beforehand. The lower one is of gouache, the other one is oil painting. Now, in his studio, and this is important to understand the way he works, this particular Starry Night possibly took about 4 or 5 years. He would start it, turn it round, not finish it, keep on working to it. And this is the way he works all the time. He works over and over and over to finally get the idea that he wants to come. Now, it's a combination of memory and fantasy. And as I said, always the image is started by perhaps a photograph that he may have taken many years before, or he's found, but the whole thing comes from this combination of ideas. And this is what the final picture is. And as I say, he's recording really how people actually see the Milky Way, a band of misty light. And it is quite beautiful, this one. And it is the interest, it's extraordinary. It's an incredible jewel-like effect. Okay, the next one. This one is not so interesting, but it's interesting in the way that it's created. Again, it comes from a postcard. This is the Red Deer of 1990. And this postcard actually was a postcard, believe it or not, of a stuffed deer that he got from a museum in Halifax many, many years before. And this is what finally, so all these mixtures begin to start up. Now, one thing we're going to see in this one, apart from the horizontal composition that he likes so much, is the fact that we're always looking through something. We, the object, the observer, are outside, and then we're looking through, and the tiny figure of the man in the center is the only thing. And there's 3 different kinds of perspectival space in this one. And this particular one is the young bean farmer of 91, and the other one is the Red Deer. And it's basically what he says about it is that it's about feeling. His art is always about feeling. And the screening of the trees, it really does keep us aware. It's almost as if the figure is in hiding. This is 91 and this is 90. Okay, next one. Now, what I didn't tell you was that he was picked up after winning the prize, the Whitechapel Prize, and then he gets the Moore Prize of 20,000. And now we're looking at the pictures that really do begin to make his reputation. What picks him after he gets the prize? He gets picked up by galleries. And this particular one on the left is the one that made this incredible amount of money a few years ago. The one on the right. This is the White Canoe, 1991, and the other one is the Swamp of 1990. Now, in this case, you're going to see something else that's very interesting. His passion for for reflection. Now, look at Swant very carefully, and you see this idea of looking through to the object. You see the trees, the front here. Then there's another perspectival space at the back there, and then there's this water, the reflection, and the reflection of the boat inside it. Particularly true in this one on the left. This one is 1991. And there's no doubt about it that this is the one that made this incredible amount of money. And as I said, they start usually with this record of photographs of all sorts of things that start them up. And they're personal in the sense of again, he's working, remember he's now in London with his wife and children. And he's in London working in faintly the sort of King's Cross area. But they're really about his memories of Canada, because he spent most of his adult life in Canada, apart from that time in Trinidad. Okay, let's look at the next one, because these begin to believe. Again, note the three objects here. This is the house that Jacques built. And this is again a reference to the Newman. This is 1992, and it's one of the ones that this particular one is owned by the Tel Aviv Museum. Now, this is a reference to a combination of things, combination of his time in King's Cross and his memory of the sort of rather primitive houses of Canada. Because in the center here, look here, these two figures here, these two things here, and they are poppy, they're poppies. And it's a reference to the drug culture, particularly the LSD. And this was very much in his youth, what was happening in the King's Cross area. So you've got these three images always at the top. And the one on the right, this took him many, many years, kept on coming back to it. And it's very mysterious, because when you look at it carefully, in the reflection of the water, and this particular one is called Pond Life, and it's 1993, there are reflections of figures which actually don't appear in this area here, behind here. So you've got this extremely mysterious sense of, as I say, almost fantasy.
Or memory.
And a combination of memory. They're tremendously interesting. And this particular one here, Susan, a woman called Sue Hubbard, says, this is less a painting that addresses, but it addresses the heart. But one speaks of the eye and the mind. And it's the way the eye looks is what is really going on about all this time. Now, he has in the next ones are even, I think these are personally think the ones that we like most of all. And the one on the left is Rosedale. Now, Rosedale, the Rosedale area of Toronto is a very, very smart area. It's a bit like Hampstead, and the houses are very, very large. And the picture on the right, which is the architect's house in the ravine, is literally off the edge of Rosedale. And you can see again these extraordinary images of the trees and the way that we're looking through into the ravine. On the left, he says of this one, I'm quoting him, the painting called Rosedale, which is a view of a grand Rosedale manor through the trees from a snapshot I took very early. Now, he says of this one that as a little boy, as a child, he went to see an architect's house, and the architect's name was Ebhard Ziegler. And this is a sort of a memory again of his experience. But look at the way that we're seeing, we the onlooker, are looking right the way through into the distance of this big house. And is it snow that's coming down here? Is it winter leaves? winter trees, and you can just see the image of the house behind it. These are 1991, and these are all, he's working in London, and these are all references to Canada and Toronto. And this is the important thing. He never, ever, ever, until he gets to Trinidad really, does he actually ever show us the image in which he's currently living. Now, usually his memory of part of his memory, as I said before. Okay, next one. This is extraordinary. This particular one here is called Pine House, Rooms for Rent, and this is 1994. Now, he later on talks about the creation of this particular image, and it's very interesting. He was driving by in a car, and it's called House for Rent, and it literally was a place falling apart, a big building was falling apart, and sort of itinerant workers lived in it. And he took this photograph of this falling down house. He was interested in it. And later on, literally 5 years later, he was passing the same area, and he discovered that, of course, they pulled the house down and they built flats inside. And from that, he creates this sort of nostalgic look, this nostalgic memory of this house. And as I say, it was a home for transient workers. And often you get into these pictures, you're going to get it much more so when he goes to Trinidad, but you get faintly social references of particularly people who weren't able to live in the comfortable style of the middle class. The one on the right is very, very beautiful. This is also 94, and it's called Jetty. And in this case, you see something quite beautiful. You see the lone figure here, the only figure, and of course, again, now we're beginning to look at the canoe pictures, because here's the canoe. Here's the extraordinary lake of Canada, and these huge pine trees, which I gather are very typical of that period, that place. These, I think, are very beautiful. The next one is important. The one on the left is very important because this is the picture. It's called Blosser, and it's in 1993. And the reason that this is so important is because it won the John Moore Prize in 93. And this really did settle him as far as an artist that a lot of the galleries started to try to get him. And eventually it was Victoria Miro who actually picked him. In this particular case, it's his brother. It's his brother. And this again is a memory of Canada. And they poured water on the ice to improve the reflection. And what is so interesting about this one is this picture, he says, is not about an event so much. It's about his brother's thinking. It's his brother bent over, lost in thought. And who knows, is his memory up here? And here we get just, again, this wonderful movement here of the reflection of the water here. And as I say, this won the prize in 93, and this really did begin his international reputation. The picture on the right, same year, is called Window Pane. And later on, this was so successful that he etched it when he got involved in etching in 97. And this is when people who were now beginning to collect him, when they were describing his work, they were talking about magic realism. They didn't really know how to describe it. He says, it says here, I was reading a review, and what this particular man said was that the DOIG's practice is that he has repeatedly attempted to capture the intangible workings of perception, recognition, and remembrance, and that it's only with distance engendered by time and place that we're able to comprehend the essence of our own reality. this was a review of these pictures. And then I say it's called Magic Realism. Now we're now going to look at the ones that I think are perhaps the most interesting of all time. Now, this particular group of paintings are Corbusier's building. It's the Unity of Habitation, and it was built in 1957, and it is in France, in the northern part of France, and it literally was a place in which a series of buildings which became a sort of temple of modernism. It was started in 1957, and 20 years later, the people had moved out and it was forsaken and broken. And a group of architects and wealthy people decided that it must not, because it was such a point of modernism, that it must be repaired. And he, together with this group, went to look at it. And this is what he actually saw. It was, as I say, he actually went to see it in 91. And he says of this particular one that it was for him the most extraordinary experience. He says that he was, and I'm so sorry, but I'm trying to quote him. I'll find. Yes, he says, this is what he actually said. I intended these paintings to be about the act of looking through to find focus. I purposely painted the man-made building through the trees rather than paint them first, and then to paint a screen of trees, nature on top. I'd seen Cézanne do this a lot, the light of architecture glimpses. Instead of painting the facade of the building and then shrouding it in trees, I would pick the architecture through the foliage so that the picture would push itself up to your eye. I thought it was a much more real way of looking at things, because that is the way the eye looks. You're constantly looking through things, seeing the foreground and the background at the same time. And this is what we're looking at. And he did 9 of these. And these are the ones that were actually shown. Actually, I think at the Tate a long time ago, we think we've seen these. And this the first one here is perhaps the most successful. And this is the cabin essence. And this is 93, 94. It's enormous. It's 230 by 330. Well, I don't mean inches, I mean
meters.
Meters, of course. And it's a concrete pad. And it was first shown actually at the Victoria Miro Gallery in 1994. And the next one, so no, can I go back just a minute, because I haven't because I wanted to again to talk about this one in terms of space. Can you see how these extraordinary figures, we're looking through, we're in 3 lots of looking through here. We just see glimpses of the building through it. They're quite extraordinary. They're very, very beautiful. Okay, the next one, we can look now. And they really are. As I say, altogether, he actually did 9 of these. And they were all roughly about the same time. They're finished in 94. This is again called the Concrete Cabin. It's the same figures here, and this one here too. And this is just through the trees. Both of these two, they're all virtues of it. And the next one on this one is one of the last that he did. But the interesting one on this particular one is later on, an etching he did of them in 1996, 2 years later. And always he's looking through this screen of trees. You'll find this extraordinary sense of many, many, many of his work. You're looking through something all the time.
Well, these are actually, sorry to interrupt, but these are actually views that don't exist anymore. Because I took my students to this about 7-8 years ago.
Oh, did you? I didn't know that.
And
don't they exist?
There's a radius around the Unité that has been completely cleared.
Has it?
So
I see.
You actually have sort of like giant tracts of just grass around the Unité. So in a way, it's kind of like what you see now is modernism reestablishing itself in the space as architecture. Whereas these, it's the triumph of like nature over modernism.
And the other thing that I ought to have told you to begin with, and this is something that it's not usually just talked about with it. Actually, it's very, very, very close to the great cemetery of the First World War, the terrible, terrible period of Verdun, when so many people were killed. And there's a sense of sadness in these pictures. There's a great sense of sadness about them. I'm very interested in what you said. I didn't know, Camilla, that they've destroyed all the trees and everything.
Well, they've sort of cleared a radius around it, because the Unité is not located in like it's on the outskirts of Marseille.
Yeah.
So you have to go down this giant boulevard.
Yeah.
Quite a ways outside of the city to actually get to it, because it's on like sort of like a promontory, like on a hill.
Northern part.
Yeah, it's on the north, but like northeast of Marseille proper. And in fact, it's been, I mean, obviously it's all been renovated and now people have been living in it for ages. So arguably this view is a good example of two memories that would have been compounded, because if it's this overgrown, you would have had this in decay and dereliction. You wouldn't have had clean white stucco with clean colors. No, so he's kind of playing with two different times.
Yes, the final one, the next one, actually is the boiler house, which was separate. It was the estate's boiler, and it stood alone. And these, I think, are very interesting. These are 93 and 94. And this one is very interesting, I think. And it's about, as you say, a meditation of decay, really. Okay, next one. Let's look at the next one. Please, this is his passion. He sees this in Vienna. He's besotted with this picture, loves this painting, talks about it again and again. And of course, it's Peter Bruegel. This is about 1560. He dies in 69. And this particular one, of course, is The Hunters in the Snow. And what he's so fascinated by, again, is this sense of the different spaces that we're looking at. We're looking at it through all different angles, you see. And he says of this, when you look at Bruegel's painting, the snow is almost the same size. It's not perspectival. It's the notion of the idea of snow that I like. It becomes like a screen, making you look through it. And he's very, very fond of this. Now, the next one is going to be very mysterious. This is really mysterious. And this is called Ski Jacket. And it's possibly one of the strangest he's done. And this is 1994. Now, if any of you are clever when you get back, you must look on the television, and there's a tremendously interesting discussion with the Japanese critic, with him and the Japanese, because this particular image was based on a Japanese newspaper article he saw. And it was very narrow and very sort of old newspaper. He was very excited by this. And we're now going to see a lot of the snow ones. And of course, these are exactly back. Can we go back? Because I particularly want to explain to them that this is made in two places. This was the first one. And when he actually saw it, he thought it was too narrow. So he made another bit, which he put on together. And it's sort of like it, but not quite like it. And you're looking down again at these skiers. And this particular one is a detail of this particular one. And this is 1994. And it's, as I say, it came from a newspaper photograph. And this Japanese and he talk about it all the time. He becomes very interested in the idea of Japanese art at this point. Okay, next one. Now, this one is the Red House, and this is 95 and 96. And this is always considered a key work, because in a sense, the figures in this are so ghostly. You're not quite clear whether they're there or not. And again, the idea of the screen of the trees, we're looking through always, and the snow was drifting down. The one on the right is very, very strange. This is a figure in a mountain landscape, and this is 97, 98. And this is the fascinating thing about this one. And this is one that I personally find it very difficult to understand, because we're actually seeing the image that this artist is painting here. We're seeing this image behind him. It's a very strange one, this one. I find it very odd, this one. It's sort of hallucinatory. It's hallucinatory. It's very strange.
Hallucinatory.
It is. It's very, very strange, this one. Okay. But these, I think, are wonderful. Of course, their memory always. It's a place in Canada. It's called Coburg. It's in Ontario. And his parents lived near there at the time. And this is 94. And they're a series which he calls 3-1. And they're sort of a strange state looking at me. He talks about sort of you're between waking and sleeping and looking through and out and not quite seeing the people in. It's the memory of figures, really. And they swim in and out of view. I think these are extraordinarily beautiful. Incidentally, that one of them was sold at an auction of, I think, about 6 million. I mean, they're incredibly expensive. And this is the sadness of it. Camilla and I were having this discussion before we came, but to begin with, he for example, the one that sold for goodness knows how many million, the one we looked at before, the White Canoe, actually was bought from him for £1,000 by Saatchi. It was a Saatchi originally. Okay, next one. Now these again are all references to his memory of Canada. This is the girl on skis in 97, and they all take place in this plot. This one certainly on this one, but the other one is much, much later. And this is a reference to Canada, and this is a reference to Zermatt. He spends about 6 weeks in Zermatt in 2021, and he does this series of skiers. This particular one is called Lost, and he's fascinated by the shadow of the figure. And he picks this up from a Daumier painting that he was interested in, and he talks about this shadow a lot. And again, the spatial thing is it's much more sophisticated image, this one, than that one, I think. This is 97, and this was this is 2022. Okay, next one. But this is the most interesting, one of the most interesting periods, one. And he says it, I'm quoting again, this comes from a sequence of the film Friday the 13th. Now, what happens actually, this particular image of the figure of the canoe comes from this horror film. And this was actually seen by him years before. His sister was watching this film, and he came in and just saw the last scene, in which I gather the girl is in a canoe and going off to space. Is a horror movie. And this particular image seems to haunt him forever and ever. And he does this painting of it eventually and in 1998. And it's called Echo Lake. And it's one of his most mysterious. And he says of it that it was a sequence for as I say, Friday the 13th was the name of that. And it's a policeman screaming out into the lake where there's a canoe with a body in it. There's also a painting by Munch that he looks at. And he says, called Ashes, which shows a woman by a lakeside holding her red hair. And this image of a screaming policeman with his hands up to his face reminds me in the way she's standing with her arms up. It's hard to tell if she's screaming, but he definitely is. He's using his hands to give more volume to his scream. The Munch painting got me interested in trying to convey sound through an echo and the configuration of the image. And this particular one, you can see the policeman's car on this side, and here's the policeman with his hand up his own. And the idea is that we're on the other side of the lake, but there is this figure of this girl in the canoe. Okay, let's look at the next one. And there's a detail of this, which shows you more clearly the side, the figure of the face of the man with his hands over his face. And the later etching, the etching of the lake, which is 2000. The Echo Lake was this particular one. The Echo of the Lake was 98, and he does this series of etchings in 2000. Now, he again, they're all, this particular group are references to Canada. Okay, let's put the next one on because it's even more interesting in terms of memory. It appears that this particular tunnel under the bridge was painted by an artist, a young boy called Brian Johnson, and he was in 1972, and he was 16 years old, and he did this painting, and he does this series of this particular tunnel, and it's literally as he first sees it in this car as he's going west, and you can see the shape of the road. And here, this very interesting one here at the bottom one, it's got this particular one are called the Country Rock series, and the wing mirror is 1999, and they're all about 98, 99, and these he does again about 6 or 7 of these, and he painted 3 very big ones between 98 and 2000. And it's really about the road going out of the city of Toronto. Now, in 2000, something interesting happened. When he was at Chelsea School of Art, he made a great friend of Chris O'Feely. And Chris O'Feely was offered a fellowship at Trinidad for a year. And when he heard of this, he said that he'd like to join him with it, and so the fellowship was extended, and they went together in 2000. Now I'm going to show you Chris O'Feely's work at this time, the next one, and this is what O'Feely was doing at this particular point. He, by the way, eventually won the Turner Award, but this particular one is Mono Onro of 1999 to 2002, and the other one is Night and Day, which is 2014. Now they went on this trip, and he was so interested and so excited by it. He felt to begin with, he felt very doubtful about going, because he said that he remembered, you see, he was a little boy, he was about 6 or 7 when they left Trinidad as a child, and he found that he knew the way all on the roads and everything. He found a complete sense of companion, of happiness and feeling almost like home when he got there. But he was very worried because he felt himself to be this white man coming and imposing himself on this in this colonial, this ex-colonial country, because when he and his family were living there, it was of course under the British rule. And so they lived there literally as the white people in China, went back to this entirely black country. But he loved it so much that he came back, and in 2 years' time, he brought his wife and his children, and he came to Trinidad. He expected to stay there for about 6 months or something, but of course, in the end, he stayed 20 years, can you believe? And the next one is going to show you some of the work that he did here in Trinidad. Now, this particular series, image of the bather, he does it over and over again. Now you have to, he talks in one of the lectures that the pieces I read, he feels an inadequate draftsman because he did never really had the sort of the old-fashioned traditional training as a draftsman. And perhaps this is why he continually paints over and over again this figure of the bather. And of course he looks like everybody else did at the Cézanne, of course, the Cézanne bather of 1885. But the one that surprises me is the center. I personally didn't know this picture at all. And this is late Munch. He's passionately interested in Munch. And this particular one is the man bathing of 1918. Now, this rather odd bather here, he again is describing what it feels to be a white artist in black Trinidad, because this is called Bather Sings the Calypso, and it's 2019. And it's distemper, and the back figure, there's a figure of a man with a cobra around his neck. Now, what I had since discovered was the cobras are there are a lot of them in Trinidad, and many times one of the things that they do, they take the sting out of it or something, and they bring it down to the seaside for the tourist to see the cobra. I read this, I don't know whether this is true or not. Okay, next one, because we're going to be looking now at this obsession with the canoe and the girl in the canoe from the Friday the 13th. Here she is, here in the canoe with her hand over the side here. But the one on the right, I think, is absolutely wonderful. This is called Reflection. But this title is very, very interesting. It says, "What does your soul look like?" It's 1996. And it's almost life-size, it's enormous. And you see, it implies that the figure reflected on the surface is wondering about the nature of his own soul. You can see the figure here. Don't see the man, but you see the figure just in the reflection. And again, this extraordinary image of memory and fantasy is what becomes. This is 96, by the way, and this is 97. And it's all taking place. He's now in Trinidad, next one. And we see this astonishing one here. It's called 100 Years Ago. And what we're looking at is this extraordinary figure, this huge canoe. And we're looking back right in the distance. We're looking at this island. And he says of this island, when you're in the canoe and you're looking towards the island, it looks so glamorous. It looks, the big building in the center looks like a great house. In fact, it's a prison. And it's a prison of people. It's a life prison. People are never, ever going to leave this prison. And this becomes an obsession with him. Now, this particular picture takes him ages and ages to do. As I say, it's called 100 Years Ago. And it's 2001. And it's the island, as I said, but he looks, the figure in the center, he can never really make up his mind. It changes several times. And you see on the I found two earlier images of what the figure in the center, the figure, and it's sort of faintly Christ-like, which is very strange. And but it's sort of nostalgic in a curious way. Now the blue is very important to him, the color. He's fascinated by Matisse, and it's Matisse's blue that we're looking at here. Okay, next one. Now this particular one was the very, very first picture he did of Trinidad when he got here. And it's called Grand Rivera, and it's 2001, 2002. And it's the first big painting of it. And what he says about this in another article I was reading was that this particular part of the island was almost, and there was not many people there, and it was the place where turtles came to it was a sort of they moved, the turtles came all the time, and there's virtually no people there at that, because it became very popular. And you see this very strange figure of the horse, which goes again and again. There's nobody in this, and again the empty canoe. It's a very, very beautiful one, I think, and it was the first one, but it was painted in London. It was painted in London. It was not painted in Trinidad. And this one is owned by the National Gallery of Canada. But the next one is the most strange one. This is called Gasto sur Molten Talsberg. I can't possibly, it's in German. It's 2002. Now this comes from a 19th century postcard he sees of a German town, and he becomes absolutely fascinated with it, particularly the strange walls he wants to paint. And it's, as I say, it's memory, but when he did it, the photograph itself doesn't have figures in it, and he felt that it needed figures, and he remembered that when he was in London and he was working as a sort of a dresser for the opera company, he and his friend dressed up in the costumes of a Stravinsky ballet, Pachuca, in much earlier. And this is the figures here, which he puts himself. He's the one in the dark suit, and his friend is the one in the lighter one. And later on, he makes an etching of it. And this particular one, it does remember, it does look a little bit like a theatrical backdrop. And as I say, it originally comes from this German postcard he finds. But you see, always you've got an interesting point about the Trinidad, which I didn't know until I read this. It appears that they're so near the equator that it gets dark at 6:30 every night, and therefore there's not anything like the electric light that there is in London or any of the cities. It's relatively empty, so you really only see the stars, and a lot of his work is done. He works actually at night. It was something he started early on, when he felt that the only time he could paint was night, because he was working during the day in order to make money. And so he now paints almost always at night. Okay, next one. And this is perhaps one of the strangest. It's The Girl in White with Trees. And this is 2001, 2002. And originally, it was one of his daughter's photograph of her sister. But it really does become rather sort of ominous. It's a really frightening one. And the other one is The Black Curtain. And it's looking towards one of the islands which are around Trinidad. And this is the Monkey Island of 2004. Now he's beginning to work oil on linen. And he likes this because he doesn't put a surface on
doesn't prep the linen like you would canvas.
No, like you would canvas. And so the paint goes inside. It sort of spreads out in this very interesting way. And it's really about time and space, really. And it really is a sort of different world. Okay, next one. This is one of the most interesting. This is one of the most interesting. It's a fisherman. It's actually a reference to something that happened. I've got somewhere. I carefully found this yesterday, and of course, needless to say, I've still got it. No, I can't. I found this quotation, and of course, I've lost it now. But the point, I'll remember really. What happened when he and the filly first went to Trinidad, and we're talking about 2000, they went into the sort of jungle part and the water, and they were absolutely alone. There was nobody there. Then suddenly they saw in the water a man and a pelican, and they thought that he was rescuing this pelican, but in fact he was wringing its neck. It was really, really a terrible thing, and DOIG remembered this entirely, and in 2002 he did this first watercolor on gouache of the figure clutching the pelican. What actually happened is they were too embarrassed to take a photograph, and he never felt he did this drawing from memory, and then eventually he found again a photograph. He found an Indian photograph of India, West Indian photograph of India, of a fisherman pulling a net along the coast. And this is what is the background to this one here. And so this is Pelican 2004 and the Fisherman 2002. And the next one, the final one, he then sees, he remembers, he sees a Matisse, and it's called A Shaft of Sunlight in the woods of Trevone. He saw it in a Tate in 2002. This is the Matisse. And this is his final picture of the pelican stag of 2004. And he's given up. You're now no longer seeing the figure with the pelican, but just the figure of the man. And this astonishing piece of, he's allowed the paint to drip down in this particular one. And this is the most successful. And as I say, it comes through all these different images. Okay, next one. Now he and his friend start, a Trinidad artist, a man called Shea Lovelace, they start a film club. And this particular series, they started in 2003, and they do it because they're literally, and there's no place in Trinidad where they could see the kind of films that they wanted to see themselves. And so every time they have one a week, they have a film a week. And before the film, he always makes these posters, two of which I'm showing you, because in the end, there was an exhibition of over 80 of them in 2007 of these posters. And this becomes a passion for him. The reason that I'm telling you about this specifically is that film for him, the ideas of film, particularly remember this one of the horror film of the Friday the 13th. This particular image of films was something that helped him to create his pictures. It's terribly important, this one. Okay, this one is very nice, this particular one. And this particular picture on the right is based on the picture, on the Daumier picture, which he saw in Chicago. And it's the print seller of 1860-65. And he becomes very fascinated by this figure, but he wants to change him. He wants to be not a print seller, but an artist. And so he sees him as a bourgeois artist, he says. And it's one of a series that he calls the Metropolitan. And this is the House of Pictures of 2004. And here it's a sort of an artist looking at his own work. And here you see his own work here with the one we've just seen with the palm trees in the back. And the interesting thing about the figure that he uses, it's the first time he's really doing something that is particularly Trinidadian. And it's this carnival which takes place every year. And it's tremendously exciting. The entire place turns over for the carnival. And the night before, everybody becomes very excited about it. And this particular carnival figure, he bases it on a carnival figure, because one of the things that the carnival happens all the time is that the carnival characters paint their faces white with a red nose to mock the Europeans. And this is a figure that he's done this. You see the figure with the red nose, you can see it, and the white figure, but the figure itself is based upon the damier. It's one of the most interesting. It's 2004. But the next one is perhaps one of the strangest. And in a way, one of the ones that one does constantly remember this one. He says here about it, he actually talks about this particular one. And as I say, I've got this down, and here it is, yes. This is what I'm quoting him now, actually talking. The upper half of the painting is actually called, this particular painting is called La Perouse Wall, and it's 2004. Now, this is what he says about it. It's a man in a white shirt, as you can see, seen from behind, walking away on the sidewalk. And he says this is what he says of it. I used to see this guy around the town a lot, always carrying a parasol. On this occasion, I saw him in the rearview mirror, walking towards me, and as he went by, I took a few snaps. I kind of forgot about it, but when the picture came back from the lab, it was just such a perfect composition. DOIG made many sketches of the man on the wall and at least 4 other paintings. He wanted to catch the kind of measured stillness of Yasujiro
Ozu.
That's it, okay. Film, Tokyo Story, which he'd recently screened at the Studio Film Club. And the picture didn't work, he said, until he put the fire hydrant quite late in the process, and then it did. And what we're seeing actually, which were known by all the people in Trinidad, is that this wall is hiding the center place for the burial ground. And so, in a strange way, it's the dead Trinidadians behind.
So that's a cemetery.
It's a cemetery, a huge cemetery, which everybody in Trinidad would recognize. And later on, he puts this figure, this scene of smoke coming over the top. But basically, these two are images which he started with before. Takes him ages and ages to do this picture, because he keeps on trying to get the walk right. He keeps on painting again and again until he gets the walk of the man, because he says of him, he's a very strange character. Everybody knows him in the Port-au-Prince area where he lives, because he walks about all the time, perfectly turned out, very, very carefully dressed with his white shirt, but his parasol is handmade and it's got roses on it. And DOIG tries to talk to him, but he does never speak to anybody. He just keeps on walking. He's sort of the local eccentric, and this makes it very interesting. Okay, next one. Now, this again is a reference to colonialism. He himself doesn't play cricket, but of course cricket has been given when the English were there, and it becomes, as I say, it's echoes of colonialization. The cricket is actually the remains of the British Empire, and he does this series, which again is a critical series of the idea of colonization, and it's called Cricket Paintings Paragon of 2006. But at the same time, it's a mixture, because he sees the people who are playing cricket, that they're tremendously friends with each other, and so it's a sort of it's an exciting. They enjoy it, but he does still feel it personally as an evidence of colonialization. Okay, next one. This particular one was 2006. This is an odd one. This is an extremely odd one. It's called JM at Paragon. It's 2004, and there's this mysterious bearded figure floating in this kind of magical landscape. And I found an image of an earlier figure of this figure here. And again, it faintly is a sort of Christ-like figure. Now, he gets to know this Nobel Prize winner, Derek Walcott, and in 2015. And together they published this last book of poetry. And I've got here a Walcott description of the Labiras wall. He says, along the cemetery wall of Labiras in the port of Spain, Trinidad, he saw this truth. A fellow walking with a floral umbrella that seems both parasol and parachute. All our wishes are still rooted in the ground, but solid as a hydrant on the sill of the sidewalk, both urgent and casual. The painting is in dialect, with its big shoes and heavy sunglasses, almost a cartoon. But in the perspective of the wall, there is both infinity and patience, the qualities that are praised in a Protestant hymn. The parasol, I'd say, belongs to his dead wife. It floats him, determined, ruminant in the hot sun. Above the street and the roofs, he passes the same street every day, repetitive as the painting of himself. I think it's a rather beautiful thing. This is one of the, and the next one shows a very strange picture of him. This is possibly, they think, a self-portrait, and it's called Stag 2002 and 5, and it's a sort of a dream figure. But here, this one here, is the picture that he gives to his friend Derek Walcott. And he says it's called Stag Apple Stag and Philip Guston. And here you see the stag is a local beer. And this is an image of Philip Guston they both like. That's 215. And on the back it says, Dear Derek, happy birthday. And Derek actually dies in 2017, and they published the book together, Walcott's last book of poetry, in 2016. And so this is a personal friendship one. The one on the left is very strange. It's got the images of the hanging plants that you see everywhere, and the very, very strange figure. It's almost a Christ-like figure with the halo at the background here. Okay, next one. Now his passion, all his life, he's passionate about this particular Matisse. The color he uses again and again. He always says it's a curious picture because he says it's kind of ugly, but it works fantastically. And it's the bathers with the turtle of 1907, 1908. He uses, as I say, in the terms of color, but this particular picture of the center one here, The Imaginary Boys of 2011, he paints this much later. The one on the extreme right is The White Boys, which is sort of pessimistic, and it's the figures in the red boat of 2005 and 7. And The Imaginary Boys is much more cheerful. It's got much more to do with that early picture we saw of Trinidad. Okay, next one. This is a wonderful one. This is absolutely marvelous. It's called Music of the Future, 2002, 2007. And he says it's a river scene at the time of a dusky time of night when there's no illumination other than that from the sky or what is reflected in the water. There are only shadows. Again, the source comes from a postcard he found in London, actually a river scene from southern India. It very much reminded me of Trinidad. And it's a sort of really from the boat in the lake looking back. It's a beautiful picture, this one. It's 2000 and 2007. Now the next lot are very strange. They have to, this is the lion. This comes from the lion. It's a religious point, this particular one. It's the Lion in the Road, the Sailors of 2019. And here it is, sitting on a pile of books with this very frame round, and we're looking through, and there's the very typical the background, but most interestingly, this building here is a prison in the center of Trinidad. And again, it's an English, it was put in the time of the English, and you're seeing the yellow wall of the prison. And it's the Lion of Judah. And for some reason or another, this becomes, it's very much used in Trinidad, and it's particularly used at the time, often people go in the Lion of Judah costume at the time of the carnival. And the one on the right is very strange. It's called Rain on the Street. It's a port of Spain, and it's 2015, and there's this kind of ghostly apparition, and again the background. This is very, he does a whole series of these. The next one is about the carnival, and this really is the figure of the, you can see the feet, and it's the figure of a carnival figure here. And it's the young lion, it's the costume for the carnival, as this one here is, and it's the carnival hat. And these are 2015. And he does this whole series. And they're in the Venice Biennale, this particular one. And they're at the Venice Biennale of 2015. And they're extraordinary. The whole has a whole room full of them. Okay, next one. Now these are going to be images that come from the exhibition, which you can see. And this is the music shop. And this particular one is 2019 and 23. It was never finished. It's pigment on linen again. But the interesting thing, again, it's about his passion for music and his passion for calypso music. And this particular figure, he's a very interesting figure. He's called Winston Bailey. He was born in 1941. He dies in 2018. And he's one of the most, he's a great friend of DOIG's. And he's the calypso figure. And he's always viewed, his costume is an extraordinary cloak with a skeleton on the back. And he's called the Shadow, particularly sometimes the Mighty Shadow. And he's very, very interested in him because his calypso images, his calypso music is always very, very critical. Now this particular shop is on the outskirts of the Port-au-Prince, the place where he lives. And it's got these painted images on the front, but through it, he puts this image of the sea, because wherever you go in Trinidad, you're very aware of the water that's going behind you. And this is a detail of it. This is a really very interesting figure. And this particular one was, as I say, it started 2019. It didn't finish in 23. Again, this is painted in London, not in Trinidad. Perhaps the next one is the strangest one. And this is the Studio Film and Racket Club. Again, this comes from the image. And this is 2015. This is oil on canvas, this particular one. This is not linen. And it's very strange. It's a self-portrait of himself in his Trinidad studio. And here, you see the drawings here at the side, but here are images of he and Ophelia again in the racket club, which they used to play all the time. Now, his marriage collapsed in 2012. He'd had plenty of money by now. He'd moved from he'd built another house in the northern part of Trinidad. So his wife was still in the port of Spain when his first wife with his children. He had 5 children. And he used to pick them up at the weekends, and they used to come to his place for the weekend. By this time, he'd got another affair, his second wife, who only had another child by, who is the little girl called Echo. And this particular one, which is the music of the 2 trees of 2019, shows calypso people playing, and the wife, the second wife, on top of a donkey. And his new house. He's looking out of the window at his new house, which is on the north side of Trinidad. Okay, the next one is also from this particular exhibition, and it's the House of Music. And this is an interesting one again. You see, he had a photograph of fishermen in a fisherman's boat, and he transforms this into calypso singers. And this is what they are. They're all calypso singers in this particular boat. And the one here, very, very important one here, is a reference to a particular Caribbean singer. And he's called Michael Boothman. And again, they're about his music, his passion for music, and particularly calypso music. He has the most extraordinary collection. And here, this very charming piece at the end is almost like paradise with the birds floating about it. This one is there. Next one. This is, they think, the second wife, possibly this is a second wife. This is a very strange one. It's the night bathers. It's very odd. I mean, it's literally night bathing. You can't call it sunbathing. And here is the final one of these terrible bathers, which I really wish he didn't do these. But it's not my kind of thing at all. But anyway, this one, we weren't wild about this one. And this is, I said, possibly his second wife. And these are 2019. You can see them all. But the next one was my favorite. This is difficult to see because it's a very large picture. You need to see this one clearly. It's called The Alpinist, and it's very beautiful. It's 2019-22. He was I think it was the one that he was still messing about, working on it. And here are some details, the top here, and this bottom bit, which look like water, but actually it is ice. And the figure of the Harlequin, for both Cézanne and Picasso, the Harlequin was a sort of an artist or a performer. And I found the Cézanne Harlequin 1890 to remind you of the figure of this one in the center. It's a very beautiful picture, this one. It's the one that I thought was the most, but it's just curious. It's a sort of lone character, and it's almost sublime, really. And this Matterhorn, and down about, he's right at the top, and down at the bottom is the distance here. It's a fascinating picture, this one. And the next one is absolutely beautiful. And I found the Matisse that inspired him. The Matisse piano lesson is 1916. And he says somewhere that this particular picture of the boy, the son of Matisse playing the piano, is not just personal, but it becomes just international, really. And he used the same sort of image for his own daughter, when this particular picture, it's called Alice at Bosco's, it's 2014 to begin with, finished in 23. She's 21 now, or 22, but she was 7 years old when he started to paint this picture. And it, I think, one of the most beautiful, didn't you think so, Camilla?
Mm.
We both thought this was one, but I thought it's very interesting, this connection between the two. And this is what he had in his mind. Okay, this is a strange one. This is the painting on the island, and the island, of course, was the island of Carrera. Now, the interesting point about this prison island was that one day he saw in Port of Spain, he saw a group of paintings in the street, and they actually were from the prisoners in the island, because this particular woman had decided that they had to do something, and she encouraged them to paint, and sometimes they did yoga and all sorts of things. And he got interested and talked to this woman, and he got the permission to go to the island, and he paints this picture, this particular painting. It's a painting of the island of the Carrera, and he actually, the figure is a Trinidadian painter painting it on the island, and he had permission, which was very, very interesting. And this particular picture is in the exhibition, and this is 2019. Okay, and the final one, of course, is this particular picture here, which is the canal. And this was based on, I'll show you in a minute, on a postcard that he did for his son. He's moved the family back to London in 2021. And they live in East End somewhere. And this is the first London scene. And it's the Regent's Canal. And it's his young son sitting on a cafe table. And it's based on a birthday card. Okay, next one, I'll show you the details, which are lovely. Camilla's details. Here is I thought originally that this was a black person, but it possibly isn't. I thought it was a memory one again. It was the man with the canal, with the boat. And they were looking through into the canal here. And here's the figure of the little boy. But what I was able to find in the end, which was lovely, was a photograph of the next one, shows the photograph of the birthday card that he painted for his son. And his son's 4 years old. And looking over the top of the picture, it's Whitman Bridge, which is near the Angel. And here it's his wife, and by now 3 more sisters, Echo, Shadow, and they've got these strands, and the mother and the little boy. And this was his present, and this is what the painting was eventually painted of. He ends up with this enormous group of children. He's got 5 from his first wife, and now 3 more from his second wife. She actually is called Fernandez Mogadassi, and she actually is a curator, and this is how he met her, as a curator to begin with, and she both of them live. But they've moved the family to London, but I think he goes back and forth to Trinidad most of the time. Anyway, that's it.